Hello and welcome to the podcast on lead-acid batteries by Ramesh Natarajan. With industry experience of over 42 years, Ramesh helps battery and battery-related industries with technical inputs and provides solutions to typical problems faced by manufacturers, service personnel, as well as users of batteries and related equipments. Hope you find this podcast useful to your business. Do visit www.rameshnatarajan.in to stay connected.
Hello and welcome to this episode of my podcast wherein I shall talk about the effects of overfilling. In fact, I should say the detrimental effects of overfilling. Whenever a battery is overfilled or over topped up at the time of topping up, what happens is the battery starts giving a poorer performance and ends up giving a lower life. Why does this happen? People say, oh, I am only putting in a little bit of water extra. What does it really matter? Anyway, that water is, whatever extra I am putting is going out of the battery. Well, what they all fail to understand is that it's not the water which is put in which flows out as extra. When this water is put in and excess water is fed into the battery, it mixes with the electrolyte, and what comes out is a bit of the electrolyte also. Every time you put in extra water, it mixes with the electrolyte, which is sulfuric acid, and this sulfuric acid comes out. Now, when this sulfuric acid comes out, what happens is it comes over the top of the cover and then flows over the battery. In the case of an automotive battery, such a extra filled electrolyte which comes out, which is also dilute sulfuric acid, because in a lead acid battery, what is used as an electrolyte is sulfuric acid. And sulfuric acid is corrosive. So when it comes out on top of an automotive battery, it attacks the terminals which are not made of lead, and these terminals as well as the copper cable which is terminated at the battery end also gets corroded. And what happens is copper sulfate is formed. That is why on an automotive battery terminal, you see a lot of copper sulfate at times. One of the reasons for this copper sulfate is excess topping up with water. In the case of stationary batteries, what happens is they are mostly 2-volt cells. In large organizations, you have a lot of these cells connected using copper connectors. Again here, when excess water is filled in, what comes out is a bit of the electrolyte which attacks these copper connectors, and you have copper sulfate formation. Another area wherein you find the excess water coming out and attacking copper is in traction batteries. Of late, a lot of traction batteries are made using copper cables. And of course, there are brass terminals at the terminal ends. Now, a 48-volt battery has so many copper connectors, and each copper connector is having these lugs which are connected to the poles, individual cell poles. Now, the electrolyte which comes out attacks these copper cables, and you have a lot of sulfation all over on the battery top. So you see, the corrosion causes this copper sulfate to form, and copper sulfate is non-conducting. So as and when the battery has to deliver power, there is a lot of resistance at these points where copper sulfate is formed. So the first effect of over topping up is corrosion on the battery top. Now let's see what's the second effect of overfilling. Let's talk about a series of cells connected to each other and what happens if some cells are overfilled and some cells are properly filled and some cells are just underfilled. Now we'll talk about the cells which are overfilled. Specific gravity is related to voltage. When the electrolyte flows out, naturally the specific gravity of that cell from where the electrolyte has flown out, the specific gravity is going to be lower compared to the other cells. If the specific gravity is lower, naturally the voltage is also lower. Now the load which demands power does not measure the specific gravity of the individual cells. It just draws V into A. Wherever the voltage is lower, that is in those cells where you have done excess topping up, the voltage is lower, those cells will have to give a higher current to compensate for that low voltage. Naturally, these cells end up giving a higher current compared to the so-called better off or healthier cells where the voltage is higher. So you end up giving a higher current from a weak cell. The voltage drops further down during the discharge, and the voltage is much lower in those cells where excess water has been put compared to the cells where proper watering has been done. Naturally, these cells discharge faster, and if the discharge continues, they get heated up because they are not able to give the higher current demanded by the load. So, when they get heated up, naturally the internal components start getting damaged. So, these cells are at a disadvantage just because excess water has been put in. We have now seen what happens during a discharge. Let's try and understand what happens during a charge. When the charger is started, the cells with the lower voltage and the lower specific gravity offer the maximum resistance. So the charge coming from the charger, which is electrical energy which has to get converted into chemical energy to charge the plate, gets converted into heat energy, because these cells offer higher resistance and they do not get charged easily compared to the other cells where the specific gravity is also okay. Because a lower specific gravity means lesser conductivity, the entire recharge process is affected. Now these cells will never get fully charged compared to the other cells. The other cells will reach a proper voltage and they will get charged, but these cells will not reach the top of charge voltage to the same extent like the other cells. Naturally, during the next discharge, these cells will be discharged even lower, and during the charge, it will get charged less, and this vicious circle continues. Naturally, a time comes when the cell needs to be replaced. So, obviously, this is not a good thing to happen for the battery as regards its life. Performance, I have already mentioned to you that these cells will strain to give the performance till they give up. So, as far as performance of the battery is concerned or the life of the battery is concerned, in both the cases, overfilling does not help in the case of batteries, and it has a lot of detrimental effects when it comes to a battery, especially when it comes to a cycling battery. The other batteries do not get as much affected with overfilling, though they do get affected to some extent, but in the case of a cyclic battery, the result of overfilling is exaggerated because you are cycling it almost on a daily basis. And so these batteries do get damaged, and overfilling is not at all recommended, and one should avoid overfilling of a battery. Thank you.
please do visit www.rameshnatrajan.in. Keep yourself updated about our new releases by hitting the subscribe button.